George Floyd's death in Minneapolis and Regis Korchinski-Paquet's death here in Toronto have opened up a far wider conversation about racism and police brutality here in Canada. I'm joined now by Desmond Cole, journalist and author of The Skin We're In, who argues we should defund and also disarm the police. Desmond, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Roger.
I know yesterday we had our pre-interview. Normally it's about 10 minutes. You and I chatted for probably about an hour about these issues. Let's talk about this. And with Regis Korchinski-Paquet, you say that is something that shouldn't have happened. It should never have gotten to the point where police were in that apartment. Maybe explain a little bit why.
Well, I want to think about what we know and what we've heard about the death of Regis and the fact that according to the little drips and drabs of the story that are coming out, she died after being alone in her apartment with multiple armed police officers. And the idea that we're getting from the picture that's being painted was that Regis was in some kind of crisis or mental distress, that her mother may have been wanting her to get some kind of support, a professional support during the aftermath of this call to the police. And I just wonder why we send somebody with guns when somebody is in mental distress. Why does it take multiple police officers to talk to a person in a situation that is no longer seemingly confrontational and where words and de-escalation are necessary instead of men with guns? When people are having crisis, why do we send men with guns? I think somebody else could have talked to Regis and provided a outcome.
The chief has said he hesitated about sending a mental health nurse because the original call was for a knife. There were two calls that said there was a knife involved in the situation. And so he hesitated about doing that. Police do have mental health training to deal with people in distress. Is that not enough? Do you not think they have enough training?
It's not an issue of training. My father worked in mental health for decades. He never had a gun or a baton or a taser to use against anybody that he worked with. And if my father as a mental health nurse, if my mother as, a worker in a nursing home, if they ever reacted to somebody who they felt threatening them with any kind of violence, they would immediately lose their job. Why are we talking about police and mental health training when we know that one of the leading ways that police kill people is responding to mental health calls? How many more people have to die in these kinds of calls before we decide that it's not about training, that we're sending the wrong people? When people are terrified of the police, are we going to say that's their fault and the police have to come anyway? Why aren't we making different choices to preserve life? Why is every conversation
Who would you like to see sent then, Desmond?
About whose fault it was after the fact? That's what's bothering me.
Who would you like to see sent then? They do have the teams with a nurse and a police officer. They can be difficult situations to handle. Do you think just a nurse or with someone with the proper background could handle that on their own?
Of course they can. People in community handle situations like this all the time. Andrew Loku's neighbor, Andrew Loku, who was shot and killed by police officer Andrew Doyle in 2015, he was having an altercation in his house too. And his neighbor was the one who de-escalated that situation. But she knew Andrew. She used her relationship with him and her skills of talking to de-escalate well before the police got there. Even in the case of Regis, we hear that whatever conflict was going on was de-escalated by the time the police got there. Why is it that people can't understand that these kinds of crises, normal people deal with them every day? It's because of our fear of Black people. It's because of our fear of people with mental health issues that we keep sending the guns. And then afterwards, we start making excuses about why it was the right thing to do instead of really valuing the fact that another Black life has been taken.
You'd also talk about disarming police and also having, say, bylaw officers go to complaints that normally handle.
Neighborhood after 11 o'clock, again, that the person to send to that call is somebody with a gun. Except I understand it perfectly, and it's that our model of policing in Canada says that the way you get people to do what you want is you send somebody to intimidate them. You send people who have lethal force, who are wearing big body armor, who have a weapon, who have several weapons, and you don't try to solve the situation with de-escalation. So my thing is, we're sending lethal force to situations where normal people can just learn how to talk and de-escalate their problems, where a city employee who doesn't have a gun is way more appropriate as long as they have the correct training and as long as they're willing to use compassion and their smarts and their sense to de-escalate a situation, instead of saying, do what I tell you immediately now that I'm here, or maybe I'm going to have to do something to you. That's not working.
Would you like to see the police fully defunded? I mean, there's essentially that money, you're saying redirect the money. Would you like to see the police completely defunded?
Yeah, we have to redirect most of the money from the police as they exist now to services that actually, so for example, does the city of Toronto spend even close to $1 billion on mental health supports? No, but we can't, because the $1 billion that we spend on policing takes up the majority of our property tax budget already. Does the city of Toronto spend $1 billion on childcare or on food programs for children? Like, we have all of these social issues in our communities that are leading to a lot of these calls. But we don't spend $1 billion to actually provide people in Toronto with any support but a lethal policing force. And so we actually have to make some choices in the city of Toronto, because we can say, oh, well, we want to have food programs, we want to have childcare, but we have a limited budget. Mayor John Tory is about to put fare inspectors back on the TTC in the middle of a global pandemic. So he said this week earlier that he's sympathetic to people who are suffering from anti-Black racism. But we already know what happens when the fare inspectors go back. They target Black people, Indigenous people, poor people, and people with mental health issues. And I'm just asking the people in the city of Toronto, how many more times do you want to see us on TV having this conversation? And how many more times do you want to hear about Black people dying? Our community is fed up. That's why the streets of Minneapolis were burning. That's why all over the United States, Black people are fighting back, because there's always an excuse after we're dead rather than supports for us while we're alive. That is what the problem is, and that can only be changed if we take the majority of this police budget and start doing things that prevent all of these things in the first place.
Desmond, thank you very much. We could talk so much longer about this. I appreciate you taking the time, though, to join us this morning.
Okay, thank you for having me.